Hello, this is Brian. Today is Friday, June 6, 2025, and I'm here just above Flinn Springs County Park, and I want to present a Spotlight on Shrubs episode today. Today's episode focuses on this shrub here, the hairy redberry, Rhamnus pilosa. This is the third species of redberry I have done a spotlight video highlighting. This is Rhamnus pilosa. It is a small to medium evergreen shrub in the Buckthorn family, the Rhamnaceae, and it has a lot of related species, a lot of relatives growing in these hills, including these plants here, which are in the genus Ceanothus. So hairy redberry is not a super common find. I've only seen it a few times, mostly around Lakeside, El Cajon, and Powell here in San Diego County. I believe it's a relatively endemic species, but as you'll see on the screen, I will post a more comprehensive range of this plant. It tends to be kind of a scraggly, kind of open, not super densely packed shrub as you see here. It's kind of scraggly, a little open, and it's a really neat shrub to come across when you're hiking here in the south central and central San Diego counties, because it is a close relative of some much more widely distributed shrubs, like the spiny redberry, Rhamnus pilosa, and the Hollyleaf Redberry, which is much more widely distributed here in the state of California, and that's Rhamnus ilicifolia. In fact, this one is quite similar to both of them, but especially more similar to Rhamnus ilicifolia. Now, you can check on my Spotlight on Shrubs video for Rhamnus ilicifolia, the Hollyleaf Redberry. I did it in October of 2024 if you want some more information. This one right here is getting mostly flowers on it, but I might be able to show off some of the developing fruit. So what we have here, again, is quite open-grown shrub, kind of warty twigs, and then these leaves that are highly revolute. So very similar to Hollyleaf Redberry, Rhamnus ilicifolia. It has leaves that are often quite revolute, medium green. However, they have a more prominent fuzziness under them. The twigs and leaves are more prominently fuzzy, and that's how we know we're looking at Rhamnus pilosa, as opposed to Rhamnus ilicifolia, which might have some gentle fuzz on its twigs occasionally, but is generally hairless on the leaves. And the leaves tend to be a little bit brighter green on Rhamnus ilicifolia. And you can see these leaves are very tightly revolute, in other words, curved down. Look at that. That leaf is completely curved down. And that's very common on older leaves. So you can see here, very revolute. And when you flatten them out, well, sorry, I didn't mean to take the leaf off. I try not to do that. I try not to take off living leaves. But that's your leaf shape. Try to flatten it a little bit, of Rhamnus pilosa. And it's definitely got a fuzzy underside. It's not a very common shrub. It's one I've only come across a few times, as I mentioned before. And then what we do is we end up having some similar characteristics to our other redberries. The bark is light grayish colored, and the lower stems tend to be about the same. Sometimes some light furrowing at the base on older stems. But I've never seen a really huge amount of these larger specimens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a picture of the leaves, and then I'll start talking about the flowers of this plant. Okay, so like I say, we kind of have a lanky, kind of scraggly, open shrub, not extremely densely packed. Twigs are kind of irregularly arranged. You can see it's kind of a twiggy shrub. Not that much different than Ceanothus. And we've got a lot of Ceanothus here too. This is a Ceanothus crassifolius, variety crassifolius. Kind of a similar looking shrub actually, but a lot of its leaves are also quite revolute. But these leaves are oppositely arranged, whereas the leaves on the Rhamnus are alternately arranged. You can see how each node alternates along the stem. So they're not opposite one another, as you can see there. Zigzag, zigzag. So, and these ones are opposite. And not all Ceanothus are opposite. But this is not a video about Ceanothus. This is a video about Rhamnus crocea and Rhamnus ilicifolia's close relative, Rhamnus pilosa. So the flowers on Rhamnus pilosa are very similar to the other flowers on Rhamnus crocea and Rhamnus ilicifolia. Very small, very hard to see. You really have to get a good detail of them. But at the base of this leaf here that my thumb is touching is a small greenish flower. They're usually four-lobed, but this one's three-lobed. Typically four-lobed flowers, four-lobed corollas. Very small, very hard to see. Quite opposite of a lot of Ceanothus, which have very showy flowers and big arrangements. But you can kind of see like a plus-shaped thing in the middle of the camera there. Those are the small flowers. I'm going to try to do an illustration and insert it here in the video so you can kind of have a better idea of what they look like when magnified. But here's another one here in the axils of the leaves. A lot of times, and they're born a lot of times in the axils of the leaves, near where the leaf buds are. I just really wish I could have gotten a better detail of it. But you can see the new growth is lighter green, newer growth is lighter green, and a lot more prominently fuzzy. They get a little bit less fuzzy as time goes on. So I believe this is mostly a lower elevation shrub, mostly found in the inland foothills in this general vicinity up towards the Powell area. So it's not a very wide-ranging shrub from my experience. But what a cool plant. So I'm going to try to take a few stills, and then I'm going to go into start talking about some of the fruit. So I saw you kind of got a little idea of what the flowers look like. Really tiny. You really have to get up close to them to look and see them in details. So when they get pollinated, they turn into this is the developing beginning of the fruit. The fruit is a reddish berry-like drupe. Very small, reddish, and a lot of times it kind of has a little bit of a translucence to it. That's very common in especially Rhamnus ilicifolia and Rhamnus crocea. I've never really seen this one in fruit before, but it's a red berry, so when the drupes ripen, they turn a reddish color. This one is a little further along in its development. You can kind of see it next to that larger leaf it's in the center of the frame. That's what they look like when they're developing. They'll get a little bit larger, and they'll kind of glow in the sunlight. And they turn red, reddish, orangish red, and inside there's a capsule-like pit. And a lot of times in Rhamnus species, birds will eat the fruit. I'm not sure whether they're safe for human consumption, so I would not go picking them. I understand that they're probably not edible, so I wouldn't go picking them. Even though they do look pretty appetizing. What I believe happens is birds eat, or other animals eat the fruit, and then the fruit goes through the digestive system, therefore making the seed pit or endocarp a little more scarified from the digestive juices, and when the animals defecate them, they'll eventually split open, shooting out the seeds. That's usually what happens in red berries in the genus Rhamnus. So I'm pretty sure it's the same with Rhamnus pilosa. So there we go. We've got another fruit developing right where you can see right above where my thumb is. They're kind of round and globose, kind of like little berries. And they're the little tiny little green flowers again, above my thumb again. Rhamnus pilosa, the hairy redberry. What a cool looking plant. Not extremely common, though it is locally common where it's found, but it's not a widely distributed plant here in Southern California. And it tends to be more of a fan of chaparral, where I typically find it. It might occasionally pop out in coastal sage scrub, kind of like Hollyleaf Redberry sometimes does. And Spiny redberry very often comes out in coastal sage scrub. And it also forms a woodland understory shrub. So sometimes in the understory of larger chaparral bushes and smaller trees, and sometimes larger trees like oaks and sycamores, you can find this shrub in the understory. So why are the leaves so spiny on the outside? Because if you rub the edge of the leaves, you can feel the teeth on the edge of the leaves, and that's to help try to avoid being eaten as much by deer and other grazers. That's why a lot of these plants have spiny edge leaves. Now when the plant's leaves are fresh, they're a lot more susceptible because they're generally lighter and gentler. But a lot of these plants here in the chaparral have toothed leaves so they can avoid being chomped upon. So I'm going to go ahead and hike down this a little bit more, see if I can find a couple more hairy redberries to finish up this spotlight video. Here's a related species. This is spiny redberry with the much smaller leaves. This is Rhamnaceae. Leaves are very similarly shaped and can be very revolute at times. This is the spiny redberry. Typically much smaller leaves, much more densely packed shrub. That was a spiny redberry. That is a relative of our topic for today. Let's see if I can find some more hairy redberries. Here's a specimen with more fruit on it. Not quite ripe yet. As you can see, look at all those clusters of fruit. All on the axils of the leaves. Pretty common in the genus Rhamnus. So these will turn redder, and they will be a little bit more translucent, so they'll kind of glow in the sunlight. So here we go. I can feel the fuzzy leaves, slightly fuzzy, a lot more fuzzy when young, but there's definitely a little bit of a down on the top of them as well. Very similar. This is very similar to Rhamnus ilicifolia. Very similar to it. But looking at the angles, I can kind of see the trichomes or the hairs on this plant quite clearly, actually, on some of these leaves. Definitely feel kind of fuzzy. They don't look fuzzy from a distance. I can see the fuzzy trichomes underneath the leaves. So this one's growing kind of cascading down from a rock. But I'm glad this one has more fruit on it so we can kind of see what it looks like a little bit more up close. Just about identical to the other red berries, so it can be quite hard to tell them apart. The fuzzier texture is more indicative of Rhamnus pilosa. But like I said, it's very similar looking to kind of similar to Rhamnus crocea, a lot more similar to Rhamnus ilicifolia, which again are two very close relatives of the plant, with which it can be confused. So let's see if there are any larger specimens along the way, and see if I can get some good pictures. So here's one that's fruits are starting to ripen. It's almost starting to get that translucent quality. They're just about full size, and they're starting to turn that bright orangish scarlet color. So this upright shrub here, I'm trying to figure out which is which, because there's this is a related Ceanothus tomentosus right next to it. I'm trying to figure out what's coming from what. I'm trying to see what is growing on what. Okay, so this stem right here is the hairy redberry. Very interesting. This is a very interesting plant. Very scraggly. Now its relatives, the spiny redberry typically forms more of a mounding, sometimes very dense shrub. And the Hollyleaf redberry can sometimes form a very tall, upright shrub, usually single trunk, but sometimes with multiple trunks as well. With multiple trunks typically, but sometimes with a single trunk. I've seen that a lot in the Puente Chino hills of southern LA County, where I've seen Hollyleaf redberry. But the other redberry, the one I'm talking about, the hairy redberry, tends to be very scraggly and not as densely packed. So I'm going to try to find a couple more on the way back to finish up this episode. I want to see some more if I can get some bigger specimens. All right, so here's a slightly lusher specimen of Rhamnus pilosa. This one's developing its fruits on it too. If you look carefully, you can kind of see the fuzziness on the top of the leaves, indicative of Rhamnus pilosa. Very scraggly growth. A little more scraggly than in the typical for Rhamnus ilicifolia. But yeah, that's Rhamnus pilosa right there. I was hoping to get a few more shots of it. Let's see if I can get any more before I end this video. And last picture was Rhamnus crocea for contrast. So yes, it can be quite similar. A couple times as I was hiking down this, looking at specimens, there were a couple of them that looked a little bit closer to Rhamnus ilicifolia, but these crazy scraggly growth on these red berries, a little scragglier than usual on ilicifolia, which can be kind of scraggly too, but kind of led me to believe that I am definitely in Rhamnus pilosa territory. See if I can find any more before I end this video. Well, I didn't really find too many more hairy red berries, so I'm going to go ahead and finish off the video now. So hairy red berry, one of 3 species of Rhamnus growing in our area. Rhamnus ilicifolia, Rhamnus crocea, and Rhamnus pilosa. Rhamnus pilosa being the subject of today's video. And hope you found this helpful in identifying yet another one of our Rhamnus species, a much rarer species, and another important part of our chaparral and woodland environments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of Spotlight.